So I just want to lay a bit of groundwork for today's conversation. Whenever we have a discussion around full inclusion, which the denomination had about 100 years ago, it feels like 100 years, it was probably only 10 days. Whenever we celebrate inclusion of LGBT, women, people of other faiths, etc., we open up a larger conversation, or maybe let's not say we open up a larger conversation, but that actually underneath, what's happening underneath is a very large conversation. So I think for the sake of explaining this quote behind me, people have two needs: attachment and authenticity. When authenticity threatens attachment, attachment trumps authenticity. So just imagine you're in grade 7. All right? If you imagine yourself in grade 7, you will get this immediately. You're in grade 7 and you are realizing that you are the gay kid. Or you're in grade 7 and you're the only girl in the school who has curly hair. Or you're the only girl who loves science. Or you're in grade 7 and you're the boy who doesn't want to play football but wants to practice his violin. The point I'm trying to make is I think one of the reasons high school is the place none of us want to go back to, it's because it's the place that we never thought we were going to be safe if we were completely authentic. And so what did we do? The same thing we see kids doing these days. We run with the crowd. Anything that may be unique about us, because we want to belong, we kind of stick our differences back underneath where no one can see them. Sometimes not even we can see them. So this is very interesting. This quote is by Gabor Mate, who all of his research, or a lot of his research, is around addiction. But more deep than that, it's around attachment theory and how important it is for us as human beings from time in the womb until the first 3 months, the first 3 years, the first 13 years, have attachments. Because it's in those places of safe attachments that then we gain the courage to be authentically ourselves. And so I guess I'm going to fast forward to midlife, right? Because midlife is the other time of our lives when we think about, it's like the job we've been in forever and then we realize that we just hate it. Or the marriage that we've been in forever and it's killing us, but we're going to choose family as opposed to really living out of our own true selves. Or the church that we're still going to, but I love these people, but on some level I just don't belong here anymore. So that's an interesting thing to think about. So where it moves us then into this conversation, which is represented by large archetypes in the biblical text. Because one of the larger conversations that takes place in the biblical conversation is a conversation about home. Where is home? And I think we in this era are having that conversation in a very different way. And within the biblical text, the opposite of home is exile. So it's interesting, when I looked up an image for home and exile on Google, it just gave me a video game. So even the most contemporary modern video geeks are involved in conversations about home and exile, right? So how many of you are still trying to find your tribe? Right? Big, big internal conversations. So I'm going to invite Tom and Conrad to offer us a piece of music as we think about that tension between home and exile, which is also a tension between belonging and not belonging, and then underlies that question of, wow, where is it that we actually feel like we completely belong? So if you can relate to this conversation around exile and home, if you can relate to that tension of feeling that you belong but never quite feeling that you belong, or else feeling that that sense of belonging is always elusive, or that sense of belonging is actually where you came from, then you are normal. And all of those archetypes are actually represented, or all of those wrestlings are represented within our biblical text. So I'm going to just take us through a little journey of how our spiritual tradition wrestles with those archetypes, and may or may not come to some conclusions that are satisfactory. So we begin with the patriarch within our tradition, Abram, who we are told is in his 70s, and he is being invited with his wife Sarai to pick up and go. So right away, there's a hint, isn't there, that there's something about the tradition, the Judaic-Christian tradition, that is suggesting that life is a journey, that life involves a vocation, that life involves change, and that other piece, that life involves, in the middle of all of those things, profound trust. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot and all the possessions that they had gathered and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. And so they made their way to Canaan, according to the story, but it wasn't long before there was a famine in the land, remember? And then the family had to kind of get moved to Egypt. For those of you who want to remember that story that featured Joseph and his many-colored coat, right? So Joseph is the favorite son, but the unfavorite brother who gets kind of sold into slavery, ends up rising to serve as a prince of Egypt, seeks out his brothers and actually brings them into the land of Egypt because there has been a famine in their homeland. And then things very quickly go south. The Israelites become slaves to the empire, and suddenly it doesn't feel like home anymore. And they are on the move again, but this time it is because of a rescue. And God has chosen Moses to lead them out of this place of slavery and imprisonment and oppression. And we're not told that it is an easy journey anywhere. We are told it is 40 years in the wilderness. And wow, maybe it's a suggestion that the wilderness can be home as well, though it's just such an in-between place that we like to avoid. From the wilderness of sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages, as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water. And the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you even bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and livestock with thirst." And so there you are. Wilderness is not always a geographical location. Very often it is a location of the heart. And it seems to go on forever. But eventually, the tradition tells us that they land in this place of promise, this place overflowing with milk and honey, and they settle there and they thrive there. But it isn't long before another empire, the Babylonians, come marching through, and before you know it, half the people and all the leadership and the king have been taken into exile. He carried away all Jerusalem, all the officials, all the warriors, 10,000 captives, all the artisans and the smiths. No one remained except the poorest people of the land. He carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon, the king's mother, the king's wives, the officials, the elite of the land. He took into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And so they are. They're, again, a people just when they thought. Remember that song that Donny Osmond sang, we have been promised a land of our own. And then just like that, they've been taken out of their homeland into a place of exile, which I will suggest, again, many of us know well. Maybe we know it because we have lived geographically in exile, away from familiar places or people we loved. Or maybe exile has been a season of our heart. So there you go again, and at the heart of the question that was raised in exile then was, where do we belong? And then the other question that was asked in exile was, to whom do we belong? Hanging out with this God is just becoming a workout. And so we know well that lament, made famous by Boney M, Psalm 137. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? What's interesting is that the whole, what I'm going to call Deuteronomic tradition, all the rules and regulations and laws, etc., that we have within the Pentateuch, like Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers, all came out of the people living in exile. Because with no longer any connection to the land or to the temple, they thought, well, how are we going to shape our lives? And that's when the priests who went into exile then shaped their lives with the law. So these are the parameters that will guide our lives when we're no longer living at home. So there you have it within the Judaic tradition, that where do I belong? Where is home? Really, I think, human condition. And then we get to the New Testament. And I think the ministry of Jesus is inviting everybody to look at the question of home very, very differently. Because by that time, the question of home then was very much aligned with what tribe do you belong to, right? So you were at home in your tribe. And this is where I think it's really interesting where the Gabor Mate comment comes from, right? So it's the tribe that rules, and everybody kind of puts a lid on their own individualism, and it was a different time as well. But your identity was in the tribe. And what Jesus challenged daily in his ministry was, well, but what you've created in the tribe is you've created a multi-class system where some people get to belong, and some people get to call this tribe home, and others are kind of on the outside or or at a distance, are in fact in exile from the tribe. So we know, for example, that lepers didn't belong to the tribe. They were exiled outside near the city dump. And then the tribe had a very large association with the temple, right? So that the tribe was associated with a building. We understand the history of that. But the temple was once again going to facilitate the drawing of the lines around the tribe. So Jesus, what passage did I? Oh, okay. So I just chose this particular passage. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, if two of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am among them. And so what Jesus did is, and I've said this a million different ways before, he took this hierarchical understanding of community and he just kind of flipped it on its side, and he also took God out of the hierarchy too, right? No, God, wherever two or three are gathered. So suddenly the conversation around home is switching a bit. He's challenging the tribal understanding of home, that tribal in and out mentality. He's challenging the temple, the building understanding of home. And he's encouraging us to understand home not so much as a geographical place or a building or a tribe, but what we create together. And we are empowered to do that. Empowered to do that. Whatever you loose on earth, it's kind of the keys to the kingdom stuff, right? You've got them. Exercise them. And then following the event that we know as Pentecost, then, when the early church and the community started to bubble up around this different understanding of home, we see again the emphasis of the behavior located not in the tribe, not in the building, not in a geographical location, but around the table. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all people. So I think about what it takes to create a community where people at the same time can experience a sense of authenticity and belonging. That those two things don't collide. Like, oh, if I want to belong to that group over there, well, they can't see that I don't agree with them or whatever, so I won't really share my opinion just so I can belong. Or if I want to belong to this group over here, you understand, right? We measure that all the time. And so I guess I ask myself, how is that even possible? There was a time when legislating belief and creed and commandments, we legislated that stuff. You just did it. Didn't matter what you thought. You did it when you went to church. And now we're all wrestling ourselves with this tradition. So what is it that's going to bring us to the table? Because I think I have an idea. It's the table is still going to be the place where I think we can work some things out, right? If nothing else, we need to eat. It's a basic need. We're going to do that together. Because what's interesting is that the earliest church had no power, no property, no control, no political influence. Yet that vision of human community that existed side by side, the hierarchy of the empire, it grew like wildfire. And so I wonder too that the table's not where we spend our life 24/7, right? We show up once a day at the table, once a week, once every couple of weeks. And I think when we show up in those times, we need to show up with such profound gratitude that we can share something together in a world that continues or could continue to be divided in 100 and 200 different ways. And I think, too, that with that gratitude also comes, I think, a depth of understanding that there's so much more that will always be important to hold us together. And the things that we will always disagree on, maybe we can all just let them go for a meal or two. Wouldn't that be something? If the entire world opted in for that vision. I don't agree with those people over there, but you know what? I'm going to commit to eating with them once a week. So, I'm not sure I have any conclusions for this, except in a world that's so diverse, in a world where there are 100 different things you could think about the mystery we'll call God in any given minute, in a world where we're always wrestling with, oh, do I belong, do I not, is this working for me, is it not, ouch, how do we model that deep, profound, mystical, spiritual understanding that at the end of the day we are still one? And the world is longing for models and examples of people being able to work it out despite their differences, and I still think our table is our finest symbol to offer the world.